This is the Open University.
The idea is nothing. The idea is nothing. Nothing. I was watching a documentary about Seinfeld yesterday. Why do I watch these things, really? I think I'd seen it before as well. It was the second time when George Costanza is pitching to television executives the idea of the very show that they're in, and says the idea is nothing. But I started with that because people seem to appreciate when I speak about nothing. When I start from the proposition of having nothing to say, no promotion. Sometimes these vlogs are promotional, talking about my music. No events to tie in with, nothing like that. You find me at the end of my postpartum depression period. I always get a downer after completing the recording of an album. Just when I'm doing the artwork and scheduling the release and stuff like that. But it's such a high for me it's a vocational thing to be in my element, making music every day. And I sometimes have this alternative vision of myself doing that all year through, just being as productive as, what's his name, Moore, not Charlie Moore, whatever his name is, name appears here in the caption, and make, 10 albums a year or something like that, or just release through Google and YouTube, because YouTube is kind of the platform that excites me just now. I don't buy CDs, but I make CDs. That's a kind of weird thing to do and to think about. Plastic is a problem, plastic pollution. Why make more plastic in the world when we can send music over the airwaves? I'm not particularly concerned by making a living. If you can scrape by making music, that's what music has always been, through the centuries. It hasn't been a commodity that you bought in shops, except for a very brief blip, and I'm quite happy with that situation. I've been making a living from, being creative in a wider sense since 1989, whether that be music or journalism or art or writing books, whatever. I have a book coming out in May of next year, promotional cycle. Actually, we haven't set up the conference call yet for the publishers. And my editor was saying, his first thought was, when you schedule a Google Hangouts call to talk to the promotions people at Farrar Straus Giroux, don't screen grab it and put it in one of your vlogs. It's kind of weird because my family mistrusts me enormously. I'm the kind of unsecretive animal in my family, the one who's possibly going to reveal things they don't want revealed, But then the next mail from my editor said, well, actually, maybe it's quite a good idea to screen grab it, and to could be part of the promotional thing in itself. This idea of showing the secrets, the cogs of the industry. What was I going to say? I was going to go somewhere else quite interesting with that, but there's more stressy side of being the family. Blather and blagger. Oh yeah, I was going to talk about a podcast. My friend David McClymont, who used to be an orange juicer and now lives in Australia, has a new album out called Vectoring Hieroglyphics or something like that. I forget what it's called. It's named after the communications that plants use to send signals to insects to attack other insects which are attacking them. Apparently, you learn something new every day. And it's got some of the same sort of Morricone, Syd Barrett kind of overlaps that my current record has. But that's no surprise because David and I have been working on parallel lines for quite a while. But he did a podcast in Australia with Dave Graney. He used to be in a band called the Coral Snakes, who worked with a lot of the people I know from Scotland, like Malcolm Ross, who really started me off in the music business with my first band, The Happy Family. Of course, David McClymont had to be talking about his collaborations with me, and Dave Graney said, well, he's just done this collaboration he's just had a cover version done by Jay Cullinan, this flamboyant Australian singer who's covered The Homosexual on his recent album, Return to Centre. And Dave said, was Mum surprised by that? And Well, Clement said, no, to be honest with you, he's the most narcissistic person I've ever worked with. And that's saying something, because Edwyn Collins, for instance, is tremendously... I don't agree. I think Edwyn Collins is much more narcissistic than I've ever been. He also, in the course of that podcast, calls me a pervert, but in the musical sense of being enough of a pervert to want to twist whatever music David had served up to me and make it into something else. So I guess that's a nasty way of saying that I'm creative, you know. I use that term myself, of course, obviously. So seeing that I was promoting this podcast on my Facebook page, David quickly dashed off an email saying, you know, I didn't really mean it to say you were a terrible narcissist and a pervert and all the rest of it. But I said, no, that's absolutely fine. You can say any of that stuff. But my impression is that compared with today's modern young people, I'm actually much less of a narcissist. I mean, here I am showing myself, sitting here, photographing myself. So obviously I am. And I've been doing it for years as well. But I feel that, you know, I don't have an Instagram account, for instance, and I'm not particularly into showing selfies. I just learned the phrase 2 days ago for a gratuitous selfie. It's like a Tumblr slang acronym, which is gratuitous photo of yourself, GPOY or something. Apparently that's a thing on Tumblr. I've been on Tumblr for years, but never knew that. But it tends to be used for photographs which are not of oneself, but are of things which sum up one's soul. So I saw it in the context of a friend of mine who posts photographs of ruined pianos in derelict houses, and she said, this is a gratuitous photograph of myself, but only in the most metaphorical way. But I would say in a wider sense, I don't knock narcissism. I think narcissism is a valuable corrective to depression, and we seem to be living in an age with an epidemic of depression. It's weird because it's something I've never experienced, and I think it's because narcissism is a kind of corrective, a kind of psychological corrective to depression. Depression seems to be all about feelings of lack of self-worth, and of course narcissism is also, it contains a component of that, but it's as if there's some homeopathic thing where you know, there's this little injection of self-doubt, and then you develop a kind of carapace of grandiosity around that to protect yourself from the internal enemy. So I don't think I'm grandiose, and I'm also not exploitative and manipulative as many narcissists are. I simply believe in a fairly stubborn way in my own talent and my own eventual recognition, which is kind of strange because I haven't really had much recognition. I've been working away on the fringes of various scenes and generally missed all the boats, you know, missed all the ferries to the Diamond City. But I kind of knew that I would be an unbearable person if I were indulged by fame and success and wealth and all the rest of it. I kind of thought that wasn't, in quite a Calvinist way, I thought that wouldn't be good for my soul. And seeing what drugs have done to people and what fame has done to people, and just seeing, you can witness within yourself how you feel entitled. Suddenly you feel puffed up and entitled, and kind of you stop being other-oriented in a healthy way, respecting other people, and start thinking of other people as pygmies who, you know, in that Kinski song I wrote a few years ago saying, I'm surrounded by failure. I think that's inevitably how you'd start to think if you're a success. I'm surrounded by failure. Why is everybody else? Even Bowie, who seemed to be a fairly grounded and nice person in many ways, or he could project that when he wanted to. Later in life, certainly he was like that. But he said to his bass player, Gail, you wouldn't have liked me in the 70s when I was on drugs, when I was on cocaine, when I was telling people what to do left, right and centre, when, you know, I thought that I could be a great fascist dictator if need be. I think that does, fame and success can bring that, and cocaine certainly can bring that out in oneself. But I'm lucky enough not to have succeeded. But as I told Ariel Pink when I interviewed him a couple of years ago, weirdly enough, in my late 50s, I still feel that success is ahead of me, which is such a strange but rather pleasant feeling. I think, and also I really enjoy being underrated. I think it's kind of reassuring. You get a warm glow of a slight sense of injustice. That I'm not reviewed in fucking Pitchfork, you know, and haven't been for several years, and that they don't give a damn. No matter how good, you know, I could make the best record since Pet Sounds, or even a better record than Pet Sounds, and it would still not even be reviewed in Pitchfork. it's obviously not about the quality of the music. It's about various things to do with your profile, your perceived position, your age. I'm now getting to the age because I'm pushing 60, which is kind of a weird thought, but it doesn't particularly alarm me. It's just a kind of weird thought, but it does mean in an artist's career trajectory, it's kind of the stage where if there is going to be a kind of lifetime achievement award or a kind of retrospective which decides your position in culture, it's going to happen about now, or it's going to be happening continuously between 60 and 80. If I'm lucky enough to keep rolling through into my 80s, there will be this kind of sense of a sunset and a kind of warm glow of, possible recognition in retrospect. There are the people who remember you from your early days when you were in your 20s and you were ambitious and you were making your mark, putting yourself on the map. And then there are new generations who come along all the time. So a lot of the people who are tweeting about me are people who are 20 years old. They're students, aren't students, whatever. There are some, not very many, but there are some coming along. And the fact that I'm doing this memoir, which is coming out on a fairly reputable publisher next year, will obviously help. There haven't been any documentaries about me. One of the tragic things to think about, I've been thinking a lot, like many people in my immediate sort of music community, been thinking about David Berman this week because he committed suicide last week. I really didn't know very much about him, and there's this maudlin kind of curiosity when somebody does that, which makes them an instant celebrity, even if they were ignored and neglected in their lifetime. So he'd just made this, right, a bit like David Bowie, dying just after making Black Star. David Berman hanged himself after, just a month or so after releasing this Purple Mountains record, which apparently is one of his best records in years. He used to be associated with Pavement. I was very much, a fan of Pavement in the early days. I didn't really know his contribution to it, and I didn't follow his career with the Silver Jews. I'm in two minds. I think he is a great lyricist. There was fantastic lyrics in his songs, the ones I've been investigating in the last week or so. And for instance, the alleys are the footnotes to the avenues. What a great image! Some really so many very startling lines. And he was a poet. He was a published poet as well. Drag City, his record label, has just republished his one poetry collection. But there is another side, which is that he was, sort of doing a kind of plodding indie version of country and western music, and a little bit influenced by people like Johnny Paycheck, and he liked some rather conservative music, and that it doesn't excite me terribly. That music, that kind of guitar music with a plodding, melancholic feel to it. People have been comparing him to Cohen. I'm much more of a Cohen person, because of the musical idiom that Cohen uses, and Cohen's roots in the 60s, I guess. And there is a certain kind of American provincialism that comes across that I don't know, if you're not subject to depression yourself, I guess you can't really understand it. It's funny, I was having a conversation with, I was going to say, America is inherently depressing when you look at the suburbs and the car culture and the way that each sort of university town has a little strip mall of hip bookshops and record shops, and then there's really very little other culture. This kind of, I don't know, I find it a depressing place, a provincial place. I think it's increasingly provincial as well in the times, the anti-globalist times that we're living through. So it's interesting to watch, for instance, the Silver Jew documentary, which was made in, I think, 2004 or possibly, round about then, with David Berman's trip to Israel, playing concerts in Israel. It doesn't really address the politics of that at all. It doesn't seem to, but just shows him being increasingly devout, and because he was discovering Judaism. He was not actually a Jew. His father was Jewish, but his mother wasn't. So he didn't have the matrilineal thing, which is essential, according to Jewish people, to be considered as a Jew. But he felt that because he'd baptized his band, the Silver Jews, he belatedly became sort of Jewish, and wanted to convert to Judaism. But depression, that kind of depression, especially when it's mixed with drug taking, hard drug taking, heroin, all the rest of it, it's not going to lead anywhere good. And of course I get down when I speak about my postpartum depression. I feel down, and I have very thin skin as well when I sort of am battling with somebody, which is pretty rare. I'm very conciliatory, and I don't insist on points of view just because they're mine. I totally understand that everybody has different points of view. But when I do battle people, it really hurts me. So I try not to. But I was saying to a friend at the weekend that I could imagine that we both agreed we didn't want to have children, never have children. And I said, well, I just know that mine would, because I'm intellectually quite a bully, or not a bully, but I want to impose my values on other people. I want to communicate my values and obviously demonstrate that they're better than some other values which are out there, like fascism, for instance. And I was saying I could just anticipate my children, male children especially, rebelling against my values just as I rebelled against my father's values. And also I could imagine them becoming depressive, succumbing to this epidemic of depression and becoming dissatisfied hikikomori kind of types who stay in their rooms and are scared of life, are scared of all interaction, don't have girlfriends and boyfriends and all the rest of it. I could imagine that, and me just kind of being, obviously having to be considerate and kind and give them accommodation into their 30s and 40s, whatever. Not that I would live that long. But also feeling frustrated with that. As I'm frustrated when I see that people commit suicide because they were depressed, I just feel so frustrated that they didn't stick around, that they weren't protected by narcissism. It's so weird. I mean, obviously every artist has a component of narcissism, and it's a lifesaver, it's a life raft. If you can cling to that sense of that you're worth something, your contributions are worth something, your work is worth something, it's really valuable. I mean, I know that a lot of resonance in David Berman's lyrics comes from precisely the depression and the sense of a lack of self-worth that's encoded in them. So, for instance, he says things like, if nobody wants to fuck you, well, I can't remember the parrot. There's a nice little turn of phrase in the Purple Mountains album. When nobody wants to fuck you, you're fucking nobody. Something like that. And I can understand that as a kind of way of thinking, but you know, I've never personally been somebody that nobody wants to fuck. It's never been quite as bad as that for me. I can always find a lover. So, and I think confidence is an essential part of that, and a sense of, you know, that not just artistically, but maybe sexually, you have some gifts and you can make people happy with them. And, you know, these quite vain things are really life-saving. And so I guess I would recommend, you know, just in terms of basic life lessons, stay clear of drugs. I know that you can probably get some great lyrics out of drugs and your struggle, and, you know, memoirs about your struggle with drugs and all the rest of it, and you can feel cool for a while, but they're really not going to take you anywhere good. But also, and secondly, you know, don't do yourself down. I don't know, it's not so bad being... Later life is not so bad. In my experience, it's actually it's fine. It's fine. I'm almost 60, and, you know, I feel absolutely, you know, the same as I was in my 20s. Perhaps it will suddenly hit me at some point in the future how old I am. I don't go out at night, you know, anymore. I guess I used to go out more. I've only got 50% of the eyes I used to have. And people mock me on the street for dressing funny, and members of my own family mock me for dressing funny. But my basic self-esteem, internal locus of evaluation, as the psychometric studies describe it, sees me through all that. We make the kind of music we want to hear, and if anyone likes it, it's a bonus. That kind of attitude really does get you through quite a lot. I don't know, this probably sounds horrible to say this about someone who's recently committed suicide, that you don't understand it and that they should have been more vain. They might still be alive and contributing if they'd been a bit more arrogant. But I think we must have evolved as a species over centuries with a strong sense of, you know, the people who did love themselves enough to want to reproduce, unlike me. I reproduce culturally, of course. There must have been some evolutionary advantage in that. Otherwise, we'd all be very miserable types who killed ourselves. But on the other hand, maybe it's a flaw in my work that I don't have enough depressive. I do have a lot of melancholy songs, and I'm certainly a melancholy person, but I never really get down. It's kind of weird. So I'm kind of saying this on the verge of, on the eve of heading to Paris for one of my happy times. That's really my happy time when I'm in Paris. I divide my life between Berlin and Paris. When I'm in Berlin, I'm essentially very solitary and working. And when I'm in Paris, I'm enjoying myself with my significant other. So I'm about to launch off into that. And there'll be less time for these vlogs and things in that time, that happy time, but that's fine as well. I'm not going to go around with a GoPro camera filming my happy time. That would be a little bit strange. I will just be soaking it up like a sheet of blotting paper. But yeah, I guess that's the nothing. That's the particular form that the nothing is taking in my mind just now. Thinking about, I was writing the press release for the album, which I think will be out in October, Accordion, the other day. I've been polishing it for a couple of days, really. And that really states the theme as being, how can you be happy in your private life when the public world is in such a mess? But I think probably people have been really thinking the public world is a mess at every point in history. I think it's easy reading newspaper headlines and, it's not so long ago that we feared nuclear annihilation, as something really hanging over our heads like a sword of Damocles. We no longer fear that. Jonathan Schell's book, The Fate of the Earth, with its black cover and white letters, very stark kind of book which suggested we weren't going to live beyond the 1980s. I took all that very seriously as an existentialist in my 20s. I thought we were absolutely poised on the brink of extinction. People still think that, young people still think that, and it's really healthy for people to think that. But we tend to exaggerate the proximity of midnight. It's always, 2 minutes to midnight, and midnight never actually comes until it does.
Open University.